Welcome, dear listeners. Prepare yourselves for an exciting journey through time, where the icy wind of the Rocky Mountains carries secrets of lonely hearts and destiny, intertwines lives through a miraculous storm. In the midst of the vast plains of Colorado in 1881, where civilization still struggled against the savagery of nature, two lost souls will find in adversity the opportunity to discover that true love is born not only from passion, but from compassion, from mutual care, and from the silent construction of a shared life. Tell me in the comments, from which city are you joining us for this story? I love to know where our listeners come from. And if you're ready to embark on this literary adventure, don't forget to leave that liking seal and subscribe to the channel for more narratives that touch the soul. Year 1881. Location: Crawford Ranch, Colorado Territory, Rocky Mountain foothills. The sky over Cedar Falls carried the weight of 1,000 sorrows that October afternoon. Samuel Crawford watched through the fogged window of the tavern, his thick fingers drumming nervously on the worn wood. The wind howled between the rooftops like an ancestral lament, and each gust that made the window panes tremble was an echo of the ghosts that inhabited his chest. At 32 years old, Sam carried on his broad shoulders more than bales of hay. The scars of the Civil War intertwined with the more recent marks of solitude, those that were born when the cholera epidemic took his parents 3 years before, leaving him alone with only the cattle and the silent vastness of his ranch. The approaching storm was different. Even the oldest men in town whispered uneasily about the yellow-grayish color of the clouds, about the unnatural silence that had preceded the first thunder. Sam clenched his fists, imagining his 40 head of cattle exposed in the pasture, vulnerable as he himself had been at Antietam, when he saw his younger brother fall never to rise again. How long can a man carry alone the burden of sustaining life? The question echoed in his mind as the first lightning tore through the sky like a terrible promise. 20 miles away, Clara Rose Sullivan adjusted the threadbare shawl over her shoulders, feeling in the fabric fibers the entire history of her journey. The blue-gray dress she wore held the marks of 2 years of dusty roads and improvised shelters, since the silver mine in Millbrook had been exhausted and her small school had closed forever. At 23 years old, Clara had learned that the education she had received from her mother, the piano lessons, the poetry books, the notions of mathematics and letters, were treasures that were not easily lost. But she had also learned that the world did not always have room for women who carried knowledge instead of dowry. The wind had begun to gain strength when she spotted the solitary ranch in the distance. The property stretched like an island of civilization in the middle of the golden ocean of pasture lands, with its well-maintained fences and the barn that stood out against the increasingly dark horizon. It was then that she heard it, a sound that pierced her soul like the cry of a lost child. The desperate lowing of cattle echoed across the plain, carrying an affliction that Clara immediately recognized. It was the same desperation she herself knew, the fear of abandonment, of solitude, of the imminent storm. Her steps quickened toward the empty ranch, while the first thick drops of rain began to mark the dry earth. The rain descended upon Crawford Ranch like a curtain of ice and fury. Clara found the pasture gate open, swinging violently in the wind, and understood in an instant the tragedy that was unfolding. The cattle, terrified by the deafening thunder, ran in desperate circles, trampling the mud that formed under their hooves. Without hesitation, Clara tore a strip from her petticoat and tied her brown hair back. She observed for a moment the terrorized animals, remembering the times she had watched experienced cowboys working on the farms she had visited during her wanderings. Slowly, with broad movements, she murmured to herself, remembering the words of an old rancher she had met in Kansas. The mud adhered to her shoes, transforming each step into a battle. Hail began to fall, small stones of ice that hammered her head and shoulders, but Clara did not retreat. One by one, with calm gestures and the soft voice she had used to soothe frightened children, she began to lead the animals toward the barn. The storm raged throughout the dawn. Clara worked tirelessly, soaked, exhausted, guiding each group of animals toward the safety of the shelter. When the last bull finally crossed the barn door, she collapsed on the packed earth floor, trembling with cold and exhaustion. Sleep took her right there at the barn door, guarding like a muddy angel the 40 animals she had saved from the fury of the sky. The rising sun gilded the devastated landscape when Sam galloped back from Cedar Falls. His heart hammered louder than his horse's hooves against the wet earth. Throughout the entire night, he had remained trapped in town, Tormented by the sounds of the storm, he had imagined the worst. His cattle dead, his life reduced to nothing once more. But when he approached the ranch, the silence he found was not one of desolation, it was one of peace. He dismounted slowly, his eyes fixed on the figure sleeping against the barn door. A young woman, with the blue-grey dress marked by mud and the efforts of the night, brown hair escaping from the makeshift tie that held it. Around her, through the cracks of the half-open door, he could see the calm movement of his cattle, alive, safe, sheltered. Sam knelt beside the stranger who had saved his life without even knowing him. When Clara opened her eyes, still cloudy with fatigue, she found a man with blue eyes deep as mountain lakes, his face marked by time and pain, but illuminated by gratitude that seemed to overflow from his chest. "Who are you, ma'am?" he asked with a voice hoarse with emotion. Clara sat up slowly, arranging her dress with the natural dignity she carried even when covered with mud. "Clara Sullivan. I heard the animals and couldn't simply continue on my way." Sam looked at his cattle, then at the woman before him, and for the first time in years felt something other than solitude fill the void in his chest. The breakfast Sam prepared was simple: eggs, smoked bacon, homemade bread still warm, but Clara had not tasted such an abundant meal in months. Sitting at the solid wood table in the modest ranch kitchen, both experienced a strange intimacy, as if an invisible thread connected them through the silent act of sharing food. "Have you been traveling for long?" asked Sam, observing how Clara delicately cut the egg, her manners revealing an education that contrasted with the simplicity of her clothing. 2 years, she replied, lowering her eyes. "Since the school where I taught closed. It was a mining town. When the silver ran out, everyone left." Sam nodded, understanding. He knew well the weight of forced new beginnings. "And your family?" "My parents died when I was 18. Tuberculosis." Clara's voice remained firm, but Sam perceived the almost imperceptible tremor in her hands. "I had no siblings. The education I received allows me to give private lessons, do domestic work. I survive." The word "survive" resonated between them like a mutual recognition. Sam knew that Clara understood his solitude because she carried a similar one. "I need help here at the ranch," he said finally, the words coming out before he could weigh them. "A governess, someone to take care of the house, help me with correspondence numbers. I can offer $15 a month, food and a room of your own." Clara raised her eyes, surprised by the unexpected proposal. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a stable life, away from uncertain paths. "For how long?" she asked cautiously. "For as long as you want to stay." Autumn arrived at Crawford Ranch, tinting the aspen leaves gold and red. Clara had transformed the simple house into a true home. Cotton curtains framed the windows, wildflowers adorned the kitchen table, and the aroma of homemade bread mixed with the smell of earth and hay that characterized the property. The mornings followed a tranquil rhythm. Clara prepared breakfast while Sam tended to the animals. In the afternoons, she organized the house and commercial correspondence, her elegant letters contrasting with the pragmatic handwriting of neighboring ranchers. The evenings were reserved for lessons. Clara taught basic mathematics and improved Sam's writing, while he instructed her about cattle raising, animal behavior, the secrets of the land. On Saturdays, Clara had established a small improvised school in the barn. The children of neighboring ranchers came to learn their first letters, transforming the place that had witnessed the miracle of that stormy night into a center of knowledge and growth. During a flu outbreak that struck the region in November, Clara demonstrated not only her nursing knowledge, learned caring for sick children in her wanderings, but also a generous heart that spared no effort to alleviate others' suffering. The community began to respect and admire her, seeing in her not just the governess of Crawford Ranch, but a true lady. Sam observed all this with growing admiration and, if he were honest with himself, with a feeling he had not dared to name for a long time. December brought the first heavy snowfall of winter. Clara watched through the living room window, the flakes dancing in the wind, each one unique in its delicate architecture. 4 months had passed since the storm that changed the course of her life, and she had begun to perceive that the feeling of belonging growing in her heart went beyond gratitude or security. Sam entered bringing firewood for the fireplace, his golden hair dusted with snow, his cheeks reddened by the cold. Clara pretended not to notice how her heart quickened when he smiled, a rare but genuine smile that completely transformed the serious expression of his blue eyes. "Are you thinking about something?" he asked, setting down the wood and approaching the window where Clara remained in contemplation. About time, she replied, without turning around. How it changes everything. 4 months ago, I was just a wanderer without destiny. Today what? Clara finally looked at him, and Sam saw in her brown eyes a vulnerability she rarely allowed herself to show. Today I'm afraid this peace is too temporary. Sam took a step forward, diminishing the distance between them. The air between the two vibrated with unspoken words, feelings that grew silently like seeds under winter earth. Clara, he said, his voice lower than usual, there's something I need to tell you. But before he could continue, the sound of approaching hooves interrupted the moment. Neighbor McReynolds brought urgent news about another rancher's cattle, and the opportunity was lost like snowflakes, melting upon touching the ground. The small church of Cedar Falls had never seemed as welcoming as that Christmas Eve. Clara had insisted on adorning it with pine branches and red ribbons, transforming the simple space into something magical. The community had gathered for the religious service, and afterward everyone was invited to dinner at Crawford Ranch, a tradition Clara had established, remembering how her own family had celebrated the holidays. The house was filled with laughter, conversations, and the aroma of roasted turkey mixed with the perfume of beeswax candles. Clara circulated among the guests with the naturalness of a true hostess, but Sam noticed how her eyes discreetly sought his through the room. When the guests finally departed, Clara and Sam remained on the porch, watching the snow that continued to fall under the moonlight. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was pregnant with possibilities, like the air before a storm. Clara, Sam said finally, turning to face her directly. The moonlight enhanced the delicate features of her face, and he felt that if he didn't speak at that moment, he might lose the courage forever. I am not a man of many words. The war, solitude, losses made me someone closed, cautious. He paused, searching for the right words. But you brought something to my life that I thought I had lost forever. Clara felt her heart quicken, but maintained silence, allowing him to find his own way through the words. You brought light, Clara. Education, culture, gentleness, but more than that. You brought the possibility of no longer being alone. Sam's words floated in the cold night air like ice crystals, beautiful and fragile. Clara felt tears accumulating in her eyes, not from sadness, but from a deep relief that came from knowing that the feelings growing silently in her heart found echo in his. Sam, she said softly, her voice carrying all the tenderness she had learned to feel for that man. I also thought I had lost hope of belonging somewhere, of meaning something to someone. She moved a step closer, eyes fixed on his. During all these months, I observed how you care for each animal as if it were family, how you treat neighbors with respect and kindness, how you carry your pains with dignity. I saw the good man that war failed to destroy. Sam extended his hand, delicately touching Clara's face. And I saw a woman who saved my life in a way that goes beyond that storm. You taught me that I can still dream of a future. What kind of future? She asked, allowing herself to lean her face into the palm of his hand. A future where this house is not just mine but ours, where we can build together a family, a school for the children of the region, a life worth living. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, absorbing the magnitude of what he was offering. When she opened them again, they shone with a decision made. Yes, she whispered, and the word carried with it all the promise of a new beginning. The first kiss they shared was as soft as the falling snow, as promising as the spring that would come. The winter of 1882 passed like a golden dream for Clara and Sam. The wedding preparations mixed with the ranch's daily activities, creating an atmosphere of joyful expectation that infected the entire property. Clara wrote long letters to former teacher colleagues, sharing her happiness and inviting them to the ceremony. Sam, for his part, traveled to Denver to buy the dark green fabric Clara had chosen for her wedding dress, a color she said reminded her of the ranch pastures in spring. Mrs. Mackenzie, the pastor's wife, became the official dressmaker, and the fitting sessions transformed into social gatherings where the women of the region shared matrimonial advice and stories of their own weddings. During the long February nights, Clara and Sam planned every detail of their future life. The school would be made official. Sam would use part of his savings to build an appropriate classroom attached to the house. Clara would teach the children of the region, while Sam would expand the herd and perhaps begin raising horses. Would you like us to write to the municipality about the official teacher position? Sam asked one night while they reviewed the school plans. Yes, Clara replied, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. But I want them to know we won't accept salary. This will be our contribution to the community." Sam smiled, once again impressed by his fiancée's natural generosity. March 15th, 1882 dawned clear and promising. The small church of Cedar Falls was filled with ranchers, merchants and families who had known Clara during her months at the ranch. Reverend McKinnon, with his white beard and kind eyes, waited at the altar with a paternal smile. Clara walked down the center aisle in her dark green dress, the quality fabric contrasting with the simplicity of the cut. She had no father to accompany her, but Mrs. Mackenzie had insisted on holding her arm to the altar, a gesture of community welcome that brought tears to the eyes of many present. Sam awaited her wearing his only suit, the same one he had worn when he returned from the war, but which Clara had helped adjust and mend. His blue eyes shone with happiness as he watched the woman he had chosen to share his life approach with the natural elegance he so admired in her. The vows were simple but loaded with sincerity. When Sam promised to love, honor, and protect Clara, in health and sickness, in prosperity and adversity, his voice trembled slightly, remembering all the adversities he had already faced alone. Clara, for her part, promised to be faithful companion, wise counselor, and partner in all the dreams we will build together. When the Reverend declared them husband and wife, the kiss they exchanged was witnessed not only by the present guests, but by the very land of Colorado, which seemed to bless the union with a gentle wind that made the church curtains dance. The transition from governess to wife happened naturally for Clara. The house she had already transformed into a home gained new personal touches. Photographs from the ceremony occupied places of honor in the living room, and the used piano Sam had bought as a wedding gift transformed the evenings into small musical recitals. The official school opened in April, in a room built especially for that purpose on the side of the main house. 15 children from neighboring families attended the first day, from 6-year-old tots to 15-year-old teenagers who had never had the opportunity to learn to read properly. Clara developed her own teaching method, adapted to the practical needs of rural life. She taught mathematics using examples of cattle buying and selling, geography through the commercial routes the children's parents used, and history by telling about the formation of Colorado Territory. Sam, for his part, expanded the herd as planned and began raising horses. The couple's reputation spread throughout the region. They were known for their hospitality, for the education they offered children, and for the exemplary way they managed their property. At night, when they sat on the porch watching the sunset gild the distant mountains, Clara and Sam frequently talked about how their lives had changed since that October storm. "Sometimes I wonder," Clara would say, "if it wasn't destiny that guided me here." "I believe it was," Sam would reply, holding her hand, "but I also believe it was your courage that made the difference." October 1882 brought with it the approach of the first anniversary of that storm that had forever changed Clara and Sam's lives. Crawford Ranch had transformed into the social center of the region. The school functioned perfectly, with 2 new children who had arrived with families newly established in the area. Clara had discovered she was expecting her first child, news that had brought indescribable joy to the couple. Sam had shown even greater tenderness, if that were possible, making sure Clara didn't tire herself excessively with classes and household chores. On the night of October 15th, exactly 1 year after the storm, the couple decided to hold a small private ceremony of gratitude. They walked together to the barn where everything had begun, carrying a lantern that projected their united shadows on the worn wood. "A year ago," said Clara, touching the barn door, "I was lost, directionless, barely surviving. And I was alone, convinced that solitude would be my only companion," Sam completed. They remained silent for a few minutes, absorbing the magnitude of the transformation their lives had experienced. The cattle rested peacefully in the pasture, protected by solid fences. The house glowed with warm light from the windows. In Clara's womb, a new life was growing, symbolizing the future they would build together. "Do you know what impresses me most?" asked Clara, breaking the contemplative silence. "What?" "How true love didn't happen suddenly for us. It grew slowly through shared work, mutual respect, trust built day by day." Sam smiled, deeply understanding her words. May 1883 brought with spring the birth of Elizabeth Rose Crawford, a girl with golden hair like her father's and brown eyes like her mother's. Little Betty, as she soon came to be called, represented everything Clara and Sam had built together: hope, continuity, love that multiplies. Crawford Ranch's school had gained official recognition from the territory. and Clara had received a proposal to supervise other rural schools in the region. Sam enthusiastically supported the idea, proud of his wife's ability and dedication. During the following 3 years, 5 families settled in the vicinity, attracted by the reputation for education and prosperity that surrounded Crawford Ranch. A small community grew around the property, with a general store, a blacksmith's workshop, and even an itinerant doctor who visited the region monthly. In 1886, when Betty turned 3 and Clara was carrying her second child, the couple received an unexpected visit. The territorial governor had come personally to thank them for the educational contribution they provided to the region and to make official Clara's designation as Educational Inspector of the Cedar Falls Rural District. "You transformed an isolated place into a true community," said the governor during the official ceremony. "This is what builds a strong territory." That night, Clara and Sam walked once more to the barn where everything had begun. Now it housed not only cattle, but also school materials, books donated by families in the region, and the dreams of dozens of children who learned their first letters nearby. "Who would have said," murmured Clara, watching Betty play in the grass with corn dolls, "that a storm could bring so much happiness?" "It wasn't the storm," Sam gently corrected, embracing his wife. "It was the courage of a woman who couldn't ignore the suffering of defenseless creatures. It was compassion that brought the miracle." Clara smiled, understanding that they were both right. The storm had created the opportunity, but it had been love, for one's neighbor, for animals, for life, that had built everything else. As they watched the sunset once more gild the distant mountains, they knew they had found the recipe for true happiness. It lies not in grand dramatic gestures, but in the daily and patient construction of a life shared with respect, dedication, and infinite tenderness.